Hello, and welcome to this quick Flexbox tutorial. What we're going to be doing during this exercise is creating a very simple HTML layout and assigning some CSS to it so that we can end up with a page that looks like this. It uses Flexbox to create this functionality and put everything into a row. Now, this exercise assumes that you have some experience using HTML, you have some experience using CSS, and you understand the basics of Flexbox principles and how to use the basics of it. We are going to be creating this step by step, starting with the HTML structure and then assigning CSS classes to the elements so that they can be formatted in a layout that we see here. To begin, we're going to open up DreamWeaver, fire it up to a blank setup like over here, and we're going to create a new site. Why? To keep our files isolated and to prevent them from getting merged into other assignments or projects that you may have currently open. So go to Site, New Site. We're going to call this site Flexbox Drill and save it somewhere where you'll remember where the files are. I'm just going to keep an arbitrary thing here. Flexbox drill v2. So once that's done, you should have here in your files area the folder set up, and we're going to create a couple of new files in this folder. We'll start with the CSS document. We're going to keep our CSS saved in an external file. So let's start with that one. Click here. That was easy. File, save as. And save it in the folder that you just created as flexbox-styles.css. If you don't have the startup shortcut on the DreamWeaver desktop, you would go to File, New, and from there create a new file. Let's give it a title. In this case, we're creating an HTML file to pair it up with the CSS. So this is going to be the Flexbox drill, always HTML5, and we're going to be attaching the CSS right away. Browse to the folder, select the CSS file you just created, click OK. Alright, so now it's linking directly to that CSS file. Make sure you always select link over here. Don't choose import. And click OK to get started and create. Lovely. So this Untitled 7 is going to be our HTML file. Let's click and save as, and let's name it Flexbox. Oops, lowercase letters always. Flexbox drill HTML, paired up with your CSS file in the same folder. Click save, and there it is. I'm just going to quickly change the layout in DreamWeaver. Split vertically, and I want to show, oops, my code on the left. There we go. Alright, you should be set up and ready to go. We'll start with the document structure next. So as you can see over here, we have our HTML file. It created a little preset code for us. What's important is we see that in the head tag, we're linked to the style sheet, and you could tell it's linked because you'll see you can toggle between the source code and the CSS. I chose not to put the CSS in this particular HTML document so we can get accustomed to working with an external CSS file. So I'm going to proceed and build the structure for this document, and I'm just going to bring this in to remind everyone what it is we're trying to build over here. So as I can see over here, there's a gray container that surrounds everything. Inside that gray container, we have green boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, as you can see here. And inside those green boxes, 2 of them have purple boxes as well. So structurally, I'm going to start from the outside and work my way in. I have 3 layers to worry about, so gray, green, and purple. So this would be the outermost parent. Green would be a child of the gray box, but also a parent of its own because the purple boxes are contained within. So let me proceed by starting with the gray container here that's going to contain everything. I'll bring that back later so we can review. So in the body tag, give myself some room, and I'm going to start with a standard div container. And I'm going to give it a class name so I can target it and identify what it is when it's time for me to put in my CSS. Call it page wrapper. And I'm going to put some placeholder text in there just so I can identify it in my preview window and I can see where it is and what's happening to it. So this is the opening tag, this is the closing tag. Now the closing tag, I'm going to give some space over here so I can add additional elements. Now again, that's done. Next thing I want to add are the green boxes, and we said there are 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Let's proceed there. Again, these are going to be standard div containers, and I want to give them a class name so that I can identify them as well, and we'll call these green box. We don't have to number them green box 1, green box 2, green box 3. We just want to put in general green box to target these as a group. And this is green box. Excuse me. And we have 4 of them. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste, save myself some typing. Second, third, fourth. Okay, now just so we can identify them on the screen, in the text, placeholder text here, you can actually put in maybe some numbers so you can see them on the screen, but don't change the class names. There's no reason for that just yet. So let's look at this. We've identified the 4 green boxes. Now the first one and the last one, first one has 3 purple boxes in it, and the last one has 4. So we're going to create some more div containers. We just have to remember to put them in the right place. So here's my green box 1. Right, so I'm going to give myself some space. I'm going to have this open and closing of the container, and I'm going to add code for my purple box. Again, we don't want to number these, but we want to put some placeholder text so we can identify what's going on. And we said there are 1, 2, 3 of them. So let's grab this, copy it second and a third time. Now, organizing your code will help you more clearly see what's going on here. So one technique that's very popular is indenting. And you can use tabs or spaces, but basically if this is the outermost tag and then you have a container in it, you press tab to indent a bit, and then inside that one you do 2 indents. Oops, not too many. Then you can start seeing more clearly the hierarchies and who the parent and who the child is. Alright, so here we're going to grab these 3 purple boxes because we know that in this 4th box we have some more purple boxes. Now you have to be careful. Sometimes the indentation gets messed up and it might confuse you even more, but tidying it up will get you right back on track. So we said 4 here, right? Now again, you can number these for your own, I don't know, make it easier for you to see where they are and what they're doing, but it's totally not necessary at this point. Okay, so we've identified and accounted for all the containers. So we have our page wrapper, the green box, there's another one, here's another one. See, by indenting them, you create a nice visual hierarchy that allows you to see things more clearly, where tags open, where they close. If there's any extra space, now's the time to zap it. And here you go. This is basically our structure that now we can go ahead and target our CSS. We don't have to worry too much more about the HTML until later. So in the CSS, what's the first thing we want to do? Something to tidy up the way this looks over here, because this is very hard to look at to identify where the parent, where the child is. So let's go to our styles, and we're going to set some global values. For example, our body tag. We can choose a background color or something else. We can start adding our classes. As you can see, the minute I type a dot to insert a class, DreamWeaver is intelligent enough to know which, it reads and scans the HTML for classes and assigns them. So let's start with page wrapper. We'll leave it blank for now. Green box. So what I'm doing here is I'm just accounting for all the classes I already have. It'll save me the hassle of forgetting them later on. And purple box. Okay. So right now these are the three that I have. If I look here in my source code, class page wrapper, green box, and purple box. But what if I want to target all the containers at once and just give them like a base styling? For that, I can target the div tag, right? That's the one thing they all share in common, is that they're all divs. You see, if I select one and underline it or select it, it shows me all the div references in my HTML. So a quick way of targeting everything on that page is by targeting the div tag and assigning a value to it. So I'm going to say, you know what, all the divs in my document, give them a margin of 8 pixels and give them padding of 8 pixels as well. And just so I could see them more clearly, I'm going to add a border of 1 pixel, solid, and the color is going to be a light gray. Okay, so if I click here, you might have to save your CSS file. Just click Control S. Right, so if I switch to design view, I could already see that margins and padding have been applied. And I switch back to live view, you can see it a lot more clearly. So all this happened because I assigned these values to all the div containers, which applies to all of them. So now it's much easier to see how everything is structured. Now I can go ahead and target each individual component. So the first page wrapper is going to be a background color of slate gray. There you go. Our green boxes are going to have a background color of, it's green enough. And our purple boxes are going to have a color, a background color of purple. There we go. So, just with these very basic changes, if we look at our example, obviously the colors are not the same, but the structure is already starting to appear very, very easily over here. If I go back to my HTML now, right, I can look at my placeholder text. Do we still need this placeholder text up here? Not really, because our margins and padding and our background can now help us define where all these div containers are. So this is unneeded, this is unnecessary, so I'll delete this, and I'll delete this text over here, which is for that. There you go. So things are starting to look very neat. Next, what we're going to do is now start playing around with Flexbox to start bringing these things in order. Now, ultimately, what we want to do is achieve this type of layout. We want these purple boxes across the top. We want our two boxes in the middle, second and third green box, to be next to each other. And we want to have this type of layout in the last container over here with our purple boxes. So there's a couple of cosmetic things we'll do before we get started, but for sure we'll have to use Flexbox to achieve this type of layout because it will help put things into a row, and we'll see what happens there. So first things first, let's switch back to our CSS. Our body tag allows us to assign a color to something globally. So we can say color white, and that will change all our text to white, which makes it a little hard to read in the green boxes over here, but that's okay. Now, I'm going to have to use Flexbox here, and from what I see over here, some of these are split 50-50, some of them are split differently, so it's good to take a moment and look at what you're trying to accomplish. That way you can choose the best approach which generates the minimum amount of code. Ultimately, you want to keep your code as lean as possible because it'll just make it easier for you. It's less work, it's easier to manage. Okay, so let's start with the easy one. This green box up here with the three purple boxes inside, should that have display flex activated? Oops. Well, that turned out pretty good. The only problem is we have some extra space over here, which is unnecessary. So to make sure that it's used up no matter how wide or narrow our page gets, we want our purple boxes to grow. Right? Now I added flex grow 1 to our green boxes, but I also need to add it to the purple ones because those are the ones we want to grow also. There we go. Now, let's tackle the challenge of having these green boxes line up the way we want. Now, if we think about it, this box is 100%, this is 50-50, and this is 100, but ultimately, these also can end up being considered one row, but with wrapping, right? So in my page wrapper, I'm going to activate Flexbox. Oops, display flex. And now we end up with something that's a little weird, but remember, Flexbox helps put everything into a row. Now, one way around this is to remember and say flex wrap, yes wrap, right? We want to activate that. So at least when it reaches the edge of the container, it will know to start a new row. Otherwise, if we don't have this value inserted, it just forces everything into one row, even if it means spilling out over the edge. Right? That's not what we want, because it doesn't look so great. So we have to tell this outermost container, page wrapper, that we want the flex wrapping activated. There we go. Now by activating Flex Wrap, you can see the green boxes over here start new rows whenever they hit the end of this one. We seem to have lost some color over here. So let's see what's cooking with that. Oh, well, little syntax error. We have a closing tag here, but somewhere in the edit we lost the opening tag. So keep an eye out for these little details. They will impact your layout. Don't forget your semicolons at the end of every command as well. Okay, so we're getting there. Now this first green container is not big enough to squeeze this second box into its own row, and we want this top container to be on its own row, right? Like this. So we have to define this one as full width. However, we're also going to need some full width action here and full width action there and here. So whenever you start seeing these patterns of repetition, start thinking in classes, because that way you can assign one class to all of these instead of individually repeating the width for each one of these elements. Okay, so why don't we, instead of targeting each one of these individually and saying 100%, just create a new class, a new command, for example, called full width. And all this will do is assign 100% width to any object that we assign this class to, right? Now we also have some half width items here and here and here, so maybe we can repeat that approach to this kind of thing. So we'll call this dot half width. Oops. Okay. And for this one we'll say the flex basis is 100%. Oops, no, half, so 50%. There we go. And let's do a quick save there. If we go back to our HTML, and now we target this box here, this top one, this is green box 1 right there, we can just add, in addition to the existing class, these new classes we just created and force it to apply the settings from this class as well. Right? Now you'll notice these are assigned 50% each. They split up nicely as well. So things are falling into place. Things are looking good. Let's see if we make it larger. Does it respect? There we go. It's looking pretty sharp. So let's tackle this last container down here, because what we want to do is make the first purple box full width. Then we got 2 half size, and again the last one is going to be full size. So now I'm targeting this area over here. So this purple box, oops, is also full width. We just assigned the class there. And this last one is also full width, so we assign the class there. Now we're not getting the results we want. They're still on the same row. So what do we have to say to this green box over here? Well, we have to assign the wrapping, right? We have to make them wrap at the end of every line. So a quick way of doing this, instead of jumping over to the style sheet again, is you can right click one of these classes, make sure you're on it, and do a quick edit. Right? So it'll open that little snippet of code here. You see line 28, 29, 30. If I check out my style sheet, line 28, 29, 30, you see it takes me right to that spot, but in my HTML. So it saves me a click and jumping around, and it's more in context. So what I want to do here is just say in my Flexbox green box, flex wrap. And look at that. It all falls into place. Now I created the half width just in case I had some problems here, but it seems to have worked out okay. And I could have assigned that class to some other ones if needed, but Flexbox does an excellent job of flowing objects nicely in a document. Now you'll notice if I make this box larger, this is where I have the problem, right? When it's compact and everything kind of squeezes together, it all works out fine. But if I'm seeing this on a larger display, then obviously there's a bit of a problem here. And this is where the half width class comes into play over here, because it forces these boxes to take up the space to force this last box onto its own line. So let's try this now in our source code, in our HTML. What I'm going to say is, let me close this window here, there we go. In this green box over here, and in this green box over there, these two, 2 and 3, I'm going to add the half width class to force them to be a specific size. Oh no, what happened? They ended up being 100% wide. What did we do wrong? Not really much. If we look at green box, it's using flex, that's fine. Flex wrap is okay. Flex grow 1. But then if we look at half width, it's assigning 50%, which is what we want. Why isn't it working? Well, let's not forget there's margins and there's padding on both sides here, inside and out. So those values end up getting added to the 50%, making it go over 50%. So what we want to do here is probably bring this down to maybe 45% to account for those, the margins and the padding. And I could go, it's an arbitrary number. I could even say 30% and it still works. Why? Because the flex grow 1 on the green box will force it to grow and take up as much space as possible, which is split evenly over these two containers. And that's it, that's pretty much a great way of getting this organized. Now in terms of the height, you should always let the contents define the height of your container and your page. Assigning a full height value can work towards a disadvantage if you end up putting content later and your container is not tall enough to contain it, so it ends up looking pretty bad. So if you keep adding more text in here, right, so if you start adding more text, these containers will grow. So if we go back to live view now, you'll see that these grow, and you can add additional elements in here to align and justify the content. For example, you can say purple box, right? And again, this is a quick edit. You can say align items center. Does that work? Could never get it right. Or is it align content? Oh, well, I'm having trouble getting this to work for a very obvious reason. To take advantage of these flex commands like justify content and align items, flex has to be enabled. However, my purple box, it's not set to enable. It's not activated. I should say display flex in this purple container box. Oh boy. Sorry, messed up the code here. Display flex. There we go. And now we can justify the content center, and we also can align items to the center as well. There you go. So we got all the text centered inside. And that's it for this quick tutorial. This page should work up until a certain point. Otherwise it collapses, but that's the basic principle of responsive design anyway, because on mobile you would want to have these compacted down into vertical directions, whereas on the desktop you can split them along the top horizontally. That's it. Hope you enjoyed. So to review, let's take a quick look at some things. Our source code, this is our HTML. Let's take a quick look over here. We have our opening and closing div tag for the page wrapper. This is our green box full width, and again you see the source code is starting to get a little sloppy over here. It's probably a good idea to just, tidy this up a bit so you can better understand the visual of how your code and document is structured. There's a command in DreamWeaver that does this automatically. Let's see if it'll work. If I select this, edit, code, apply source formatting. Oof, that's worse than before. So let's try this again. Edit, code. Oof, that didn't work at all. Well, you get the idea. What's important is that you can see what is going on with your code and how it's organized. And in your CSS, of course, the less we have of it and get the job done, the better. So the body allowed us to set global values for the text, and we can even maybe change the background color of the page. So dark gray, for example. There you go. The div global setting will take any div container and assign these values to it, which allows us to have the spacing and outside and inside the containers. And then we created some little helper classes, full width, half width, and it saves us the hassle of repeating the same commands in each individual element. And basically we targeted the three types of containers. We have one page wrapper around the whole thing, and there's a green box and a purple box, and by systematically approaching each one individually we can target this stuff and achieve these results with a very, very minimal amount of CSS.